All right, so there was my 3-second break, but I want to divide these videos up into chunks. Man-made ways that weeds can spread. Well, they come to new areas in lots of ways on our equipment, vehicles, animals, whatever. So we create irrigation canals and seeds are carried down irrigation canals. When we spread animal manures, if the animal manures aren't prepared and composted properly, there can be lots of seeds that get into animal manures. Any kind of compost. I had a vendor that I purchased compost from for years, and I was very happy with the compost that he provided. But about, I don't know, 10 days after putting some compost down at one point, it looked like there was a lawn growing in my field, and I was not happy. There must have been tens of thousands of seeds in that compost that weren't properly heated to kill them. Farm machinery, certainly you can spread seeds by mud stuck to farm machinery. Domestic crops can become a problem. So if I'm growing a ryegrass cover crop, for example, and I let it go a little too long before I disc it down, I just planted a whole bunch of rye seed in my upcoming lettuce crop, or I already described to you my lettuce seed in the cotton crop or whatever. So there are many different crops that can become a problem. The grasses, the rye, wheat, things like that tend to be the most problematic because it's really easy to go just a little too far and have seed heads be mature enough to cause seed in the next crop. If we think about the golden waves of grain in California, the Golden Hills, the Golden State, the wild grasses that make up most of what we think of as this golden state of California is brought from Europe on the hooves of cattle that were brought here, back in the 1600s by the missionaries and such, and they took over. So the wild oats and foxtails, they're not native. They were brought here hundreds of years ago on the hooves of cattle and have completely changed the character of our beautiful state. Still had grasses, but they were different grasses, and they were much, much more perennial grasses, not the annual grasses that we have. You can also get weeds from impurities in farmer seed, especially with farmer saved seed. If you're getting commercially purchased seed, that is something that commercial seed producers have to be very careful about, and you can have a lawsuit on your hands if you sell somebody seed that has weed seed in it. But if you're saving it for yourself, you might be a little bit less careful. You're not worried about a lawsuit, and accidents are more likely to happen, certainly in my personal opinion and stories and situations I've seen. So what do you do to control weeds? Well, seeds must be certified as free of noxious weeds, as I just mentioned, and the percent, if there is any, must be stated. Now, with vegetable crops, the percentage should be 0. I'm not sure what it is in some of the grain crops, some of the big things like wheat and oats and things that you might grow in the Midwest, more likely. I'd have to check into that, but you don't have any weed seeds in your vegetable crops. Pre-irrigation, we'll talk about that in the next slides. Early, well-timed cultivation of crops or in-row cultivation, again, we'll talk about that in a moment. Mulching. The crop we do around here that is mulched most often is strawberries. And we use a plastic mulch, a cover over the soil or seed beds. And so you cover the bed with plastic, you poke holes in it, and you plant your strawberry transplants in the holes. And now you can't get too many weeds because the whole bed is covered in plastic. And so that's one way. There are other ways. I know in landscaping and home garden areas, we use a mulch material in some of the landscaping stuff that I've done over the years. And it's a type of a cloth material that is very fine. Water can go right through it, but it's too fine for weeds to grow through. So if you prepare your ground, you plant your main plants and you cover it with this cloth, and then use some staples, these long metal staples that you just shove in to hold it in place. Then you cover it with bark bits or rocks or whatever, and you're not going to get many weeds. And the weeds that you do get underneath will never come out. They can't grow through. If there's a weed that makes it through one of the seams or near one of your plants, oh, I've got a couple to pick out, very small amount. If a weed seed lands on top of it, it might start to grow, but its root system can't find much. It's just on top, and there might be a little bit, but you've got this little wimpy weed that is easy to get rid of. So using different kinds of mulch and covers can be really handy. Flame weeding, this is used more often in organics. So you literally are using either diesel or natural gas torches, and your flamethrower out there in the field to burn the weeds. Solarization, you are covering with special plastic that traps the heat, and you can get the soil to a modest depth really hot. But it only works in places where you've got a lot of heat. So it works great in places like Yuma or Fresno. You might be able to get away with it in certain times, certain years in King City, maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen it used there, but they're a lot hotter than here. Solarization isn't likely to happen here. You can't cover ground with plastic and get it super, super, super hot in Salinas on a consistent enough basis to get rid of your weeds. But it is something that is doable. So pre-irrigation, imagine these trapezoid shapes here are a cross-sectional view of a seed bed. We're looking at the side of a seed bed as if we drew a line through it, or we dug a trench, and we're looking down the seed row. And so here in the upper left, we have a seed bed that's been prepared before we've planted our crop. So we raise the seed bed, or list the seed bed as it's called, and it's full of weed seeds. So we come through and we irrigate, and what happens? Any of those weed seeds that are near the surface germinate and start growing. And then we come through and we do a shallow till, or use a cultivating equipment driven behind or pulled behind a tractor to stir up the soil only a couple inches deep, deep enough to break up these germinated weeds, but not too deep to bring up new seeds that didn't germinate. They were too deep to germinate. So they're just sitting there waiting for next year. And they will be there next year when you relist new beds. So this pre-irrigation, irrigate, wait a week or two, shallow till, and now your seed bed is ready to plant. These are too deep to come up this year, but after you re-disc and relist new beds, that'll be your problem next year. So here is another example of weed control. This is using in-row cultivation. When you say in-row, you're talking about in the seed row between the plants here. You'll notice that a whole bunch of the weeds are gone in between the plants. Not every one of them, but if you look on the left, this is a worst case scenario disaster. If your weeds are that bad, you've got problems, you've been screwing up for years, or this is your first time in a weedy field. But this is supposed to demonstrate a worst case scenario for how these machines work. Now, they left the shoulders with the weeds still growing in the shoulders, and I don't care about that. I'm not worried about that, because it would be easy to hook up a piece of equipment that could cultivate the shoulders while you're doing the in-row cultivation. You could do them at the same time. But taking out weeds on the shoulder of a bed, no problem. Nobody cares about that. That's super easy to do. The hard part, the weeds that are difficult to get out, are the ones in the row. Down the middle, it depends on how big the plants are. Down the middle is also usually pretty easy to deal with most crops. Some crops, it's hard to get anything down the middle without damaging the crop. So again, it depends on the crop, but this is a beautiful example of in-row cultivation. If I sent a crew down to weed this row, they might quit before they even started, but it would take them forever. It would take them a long time. Here, they could do this easy. Send a couple folks down a field like this, no problem. They could be done very, very quickly. So here's one concept of an in-row cultivation. Here you're looking at a circle right here. It's a disc with a pie-shaped wedge cut out of it. And so this disc is turning as it's moving with the tractor. And so if you imagine this thing is spinning and a camera controlled by, or a camera feeding into a computer controls the speed of the disc rotation. So the disc isn't rotating too fast or at the wrong time to take out your crop plant. So you need a camera and you need a computer to tell the difference between a weed and your plant. And so this disc with a pie cut out, this is empty here, will spin and not take out your plant. So here is a drawing. This is a whole bunch of overlapping pictures of how the disc is going to be positioned as it's spinning and moving from left to right. So you can see if you follow each one, the disc is parallel to the plant seed row. And then as it moves a little forward, it starts to turn a little more, turn a little more. And by the time it comes to the next plant, it's made an entire 360-degree turn back into its parallel position where it's not hurting the plant. Trickier to do than it seems. People have been working on various techniques of in-row cultivation for a long time, and there are some really good options out there. And it depends on your crop and your soil type and other things, what might work. So here is the key. That is the in-row area that is always the hardest to get the weeds. And you can get a huge number of those weeds with a device like this, and then just send a crew in to do the minor cleanup rather than paying your crew a whole bunch more time to do a very weedy field. And so your crews can do more acres that way. So another option, pesticides. And there are organically approved, OMRI certified herbicides for organic farmers. They exist. Just they have to be used in the right circumstances, the right time, and you know that they're not going to work with high persistence, where they're going to keep your weeds away. But there are pre-emergents. In other words, they kill the weeds before they ever come up, before the weed emerges. So they kill the seeds. Post-emergence, they kill the weed after it germinates and comes up or emerges from the ground. Selective, meaning it kills some things but not others. And most herbicides are selective to some degree, but the truly selective ones are like they'll kill monocots but not dicots, or they'll kill dicots but not monocots, or something to that effect where you can spray them. An example of a selective herbicide is Weed and Feed for your lawns. And so it's a little bit of fertilizer, feed, with a little bit of broadleaf dicot selective herbicide. So it doesn't kill monocots. And what is your lawn? It's probably ryegrass, or maybe a fescue grass or some other grass monocot for your lawn. And unless you have dichondra, which is a dicot type of a low growing lawn that is not too popular anymore. But you weed and feed, you feed your lawn, you feed your monocots, and you kill the dandelions and other dicot weeds. It won't do any good with the weeds if you've got oats and foxtails and other monocots as your weeds, which happens to some people's lawns, and you've got to take those out then by hand. Non-selective, like Roundup, pretty much kills everything, but not everything. There are Roundup resistant weeds, and there are Roundup resistant crops. Some of them genetically modified to be Roundup resistant, some of them just genetically resistant due to their genetic makeup. Roundup doesn't kill everything, but it's pretty good at killing most things. So that is weeds.